So when we use this word ecosystem, we are evoking this image of an interconnectedness of church life. Ecosystems, they're communities of living organisms, they're in conjunction with each other, physical environments interacting in systems, often complex systems. And every single part of an ecosystem, it's essential, it's interconnected, and it's interdependent with all the other parts.
Today's episode is ecosystems and pathways. So the context you're planting into should shape the kind of plumbing you're going to build in your church. From the length and the styles of your talks, the types of Bibles that you hand out, outreach events, the styles of studies, how many people are in each group, how to train leaders, all of these things relate and connect to one another. And the context you find yourself in will really shape the culture and the constructs of this church. So as you design this church from the ground up, you really want to consider each of these parts not independently, but together, and that is as an ecosystem. So Derek, tell us more about ecosystems and pathways.
I will. So when we use this word ecosystem, we are evoking this image of an interconnectedness of church life. Ecosystems, they're communities of living organisms, they're in conjunction with each other, physical environments interacting in systems, often complex systems. And every single part of an ecosystem, it's essential, it's interconnected, and it's interdependent with all the other parts. Each feeds on the other, every part plays its part, it impacts on the whole. The lack of health in one part of the ecosystem impacts the lack of health in the whole. Even if one path looks healthy, it will be brought down, it'll be impacted. They're complex, there's interactions, it's interconnected, as I said. Now, just in a church environment, as you're thinking through this, let me illustrate what I mean here. When most church plants start, there's a dynamic of excitement and growth that's happening. That means new people are often integrated very, very quickly into the life of the church, whether it's small groups or serving, whatever it might be. They can be in church on Sunday and the next day they can be in a small group. But over time, as groups spend more time together, as they become more close, as they share more, open more in those small group settings, there's a real fatigue that can set in if every single week you don't know whether there's going to be a new person in. So I've just poured my heart out last week. Am I supposed to share that again with the new person in? Can I really be vulnerable if there's a new person in the room? It's not that they don't want to include new people. It's just that it's hard to do that when there's a constant set of change. It's that to be in a small group where you're supposed to share your life, yet you don't know what's going to happen, and that's really challenging. So with this quick integration, where it can happen at one stage of church life, it can actually be quite difficult at other stages of church life. You need to monitor that. At every stage of church life, one part of the ecosystem, that is welcoming and integration, it needs to be considered in light of the whole, of the impact on all the other parts of the ecosystems. Even though they're distinct areas, welcoming, integration, small groups, this is not a question of structural efficiency. This is a discipleship question. This is a relational question. And you come at it from understanding that things work together in a whole.
Church Planting Australia is part of the Reach Australia podcast network, alongside The One Thing, the Reach Australia podcast, and Homegrown Faith. So be sure to check us out on your podcasting app. So thinking of church life as an ecosystem, it really pushes us to consider how we factor in, like Derek said, not just the different parts, but how each part interacts with each other and helps us to mature the saints and reach the lost. It pushes us to consider and monitor the impact of one structure and one decision on another, join the dots, tweak as necessary for the continued health of the whole community. And in a church plant, we get to consider this from the ground up. We also want to be constantly monitoring this question, though, at every stage of church life. So is our church as a whole ecosystem effectively engaging in God's mission and our local vision? There's this really helpful quote of Tom Rainer from Simple Church, where he says, "Churches with a simple process for reaching and maturing people are expanding the kingdom. Conversely, churches without a process or with a complicated process for making disciples are floundering." It's a good quote.
It is a very good quote. He's got lots of good quotes, Tom Rainer. So the plumbing we're going to be working on as we build out the church plant, the plumbing for plan. We want to think into how the ecosystem works and how that works to mature and mobilise people for two things at once. The discipleship pathway, that is, how do they mature to be like Christ? How are they growing in Christ-likeness, both individually and corporately as well? But also this idea of a mission funnel. That is, it sounds really clinical and technical, but all it is saying, how do we help people that we know who aren't Christians come to know Jesus? What's the next step we need to design and put in place in order to help them grow? Now, we've got a diagram which we'll put in the show notes that you'll be able to see that explores that mission funnel. But we want to work as we build this church plan to answer those questions, mobilising our church mission as they mature as Christians.
So as you're thinking through your church plant, how are you thinking about your plumbing in terms of an ecosystem? And how are you providing pathways for your whole church to be matured as together they engage in mission?
And every part of an ecosystem.
I'm very, very sorry.
Oh,
There's nothing. It
unbelievable.
wasn't funny.
Unbelievable.
I'm very sorry.